Hey, welcome everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining me. Today is, what is it? What is today? It's April 21st, 2025, and I have not done a Freight Broker Bootcamp live for several weeks. And I have a reason for that. I'll get into it in a minute. But today, we're just going to do a live Q&A, which means if you have questions about Freight Broker startup or Freight Broker sales or anything to do with starting or growing a successful freight brokerage, you're welcome to join me live. We're going to do a live Q&A, and I'll do my absolute best to try to answer those questions for you. All right. So I just realized something. I did not send out an email notification to everybody about the Bootcamp Live, the live Q&A. So I'm not sure how many people are even going to be live. So we'll see, I guess. We're streaming this on Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube. So yeah, if nobody is joining here, I'm going to probably just try to shoot out. Maybe I'll just shoot out a quick message. Oh, there's Shane. I think there's going to be a few people that are going to jump in live. They'll probably get the notifications from LinkedIn or from YouTube. And this stresses the importance of making sure that especially if you watch and follow me on YouTube, that you not only like the page, but you actually hit the notifications bell to make sure you get notified when I do go live, right? So you don't miss these live Q&As and different trainings that I do every Monday at noon, except when I'm sick or when I have some health related issues. Yeah. And I've had a few health related issues recently. So that's the reason why the last few weeks, I just haven't felt up to it. I've been under the weather. It seems like every Monday comes around and it's just, I'm just not doing well. So I appreciate your patience. Thank you guys for tuning in today. But again, it's been a few weeks. So I figured that we would spend the entire time focusing on questions and challenges and issues that you're having with starting or growing a successful freight brokerage or freight agency. So there we are. I'm going to grab a quick drink. We're going to let a few more people get live, and then we're going to jump into the Q&A. Welcome, Henry. And as you come in, hit me up in the comments with the city and state you're logging in from. William from, what's that? Ilion, New York, New York. We got Henry from LA, and we have Shane. I forgot where Shane's from. Shane comes up almost all my lives, but I forgot what city and state he's from. So as you come in, hit me up in the comments with the city and state. I'll try to give you a quick shout out. Kenrick from Nashville, Tennessee. Kenrick, I sold my freight brokerage. I ran my freight brokerage from 2003 to 2016. I sold it to spend time with my growing family and my kids. And so I don't have a freight brokerage any longer. I don't do job placement. I have what's called Freight Broker Bootcamp, and I have my Freight Broker Sales Accelerator, which are two different programs where I help people start and grow successful freight brokerages. I've had those programs since 2009. And we've put over 10,000 students through those programs. So I don't have a brokerage where I can come hire you as an agent. Okay. I did have a lot of agents. I think when I sold the company, we had 70 agent locations roughly. And so, yeah, we did have an agent-based business, but yeah, it's not, I sold that company back in 2016. That's when I pivoted a lot more of my time over into coaching and selling and training and teaching. Shane, Utah. Yes, Utah. Scott Taylor, 806 Freight. Where are you from, Scott? Thanks, Kendrick. Cool. All right. So listen, there's not a lot of people, but we'll make the best of it. It was my fault. I forgot to send out the email notification. So you can see I'm still only operating on half mast here. But if you guys have questions, type them in the comment box. I'll do my absolute best to try to answer those questions. Again, it could be freight broker startup. It can be freight broker sales. It can be marketing. It can be operations. It can be hiring. It can be the agent business model. It can be building in more of a W-2 call center model. It can be any of these topics, anything related to starting and growing a successful freight brokerage. And I'll do my absolute best. If I don't know the answer, because believe it or not, I don't have the answers for everything, I'll try to point you in the right direction and give you a leg up and get you going in the right direction. Okay. So without further ado, welcome Scott from Lubbock. Let's jump in the Q&A. Who has questions? Ball's in your court, guys. You've got me for as long as you can keep the questions flowing. And we'll probably cap this out at maybe 20 minutes to a half an hour, depending upon how many questions we have. But what do you got? Hit me up. I get questions a lot about, how do I find shippers and, how do I get shippers? I mean, I'd like you to try to be as specific as you can with your questions. Try not to be too generic, but feel free. Let's do it. Who's going to be the guinea pig? Who's going to break the ice? Who's going to be the first question? By the way, have you guys seen, they're not a sponsor and I have no affiliation with them, but have you guys ever seen or heard of NeuroGum? NeuroGum, it's a gum that has caffeine and it has like some other nutraceuticals in it that is it's for energy and focus. So I'll keep you guys posted. I'm trying it. I got it this weekend. I've tried a few pieces. It's good. I'm just trying to figure out if it actually does give me energy and focus. So as you can see, I'm chewing gum. I started chewing a piece right before I went live here. All right, we got some questions here. Cool. Henry, what is the reason why is more expensive to move freight from east to west and west to east than south to north, but north to south is really easy? Okay, that's a good question, Henry. Okay, so let me explain to you how the logistics trucking business works from a rating and from a capacity standpoint. All right? Rates are a function of supply and demand. Let me explain to you what I mean by that. If you have more freight than you have trucks, then rates go up because there's more competition for trucks to get the loads. Okay? Now let's reverse that. If there's more trucks than there are loads, right? And there's a disproportionate number of trucks to loads, then rates go down. Okay? Because again, there's competition for those loads. All right? So rates are a function of supply and demand. Let me give you a perfect example of kind of what you're talking about. When I first started my brokerage back in 2003, we were northeast outbound van freight. That means if it went west or south, that was our niche and it was going on a van. So we used to run a lot from the Massachusetts to the Illinois area. Let's call it Boston to Chicago. Now, when I would get a load from Boston to Chicago, the rates back then, and this might shock you, this is over 20 years ago, but the rates back then it was not uncommon to pay a truck 90 cents a mile from Boston to Chicago. And if I posted that lane, my phone would ring off the hook. I'd get 20 calls within 60 seconds. Literally. I'm not even kidding you. Because there was more trucks than there were loads, so they needed a backhaul out of the Northeast. Okay? So when we would run them from Boston to Chicago, it might be 90 cents a mile. But that same load, if we were hauling the exact same product, the exact same number of miles from Chicago to Boston, which wasn't really our focus because we went, I explained to you my niche. It wasn't unusual for that to go for $2 or $3 a mile. Okay. Same miles, same lane, same product, same truck, to be honest with you. So the supply and demand, one direction is higher or lower depending upon the dynamics of that market, depending upon how many trucks versus how many loads are coming in and out of any given market. Okay. So that you have to understand. So what happens is if you find a lane where there are more loads than there are trucks, okay, you as a broker know that there's going to be more competition for those trucks, right? Because there's more loads than trucks. That means that trucks kind of have the upper hand at that point where they can control what loads they take and what rates that they move for. So if you find where you have more loads than trucks, what's going to happen? Number one, you're going to have to increase your rates to be competitive. Number two, there are less loads, there are less trucks than loads. So, unfortunately, that's going to create more competition, right? For you. There's good and bad, right? So the dynamic of the number of trucks in and out of any lane and the number of loads in and out of any lane determine not only your ability to cover those loads, but the rate. So what you have to understand is that finding capacity is usually a function of price. That means that, let's say, for example, you have a load going from Atlanta to Buffalo, and it's a flatbed load. And you've quoted your shipper, I don't know, I'm just going to give a hypothetical just for easy math. You quoted your shipper $2 a mile, okay? And you're trying to move that load at $2 a mile, but nobody's buying that load. No carriers are receptive to that load. They all want $2.50 or $3 a mile. Well, guess what? You're probably going to have to increase your rates, because finding capacity is a function of rates. There's an old saying in the industry, there's no bad freight, they're just bad rates. So if you underquote something, it can make your job a lot more difficult. Now, I'm not saying you can't cover it at a little bit lower rate, because you may find a newer carrier, you may find a carrier who just happens to have to get out of there. But if you want to cover a load with any consistency in a lane, you're going to have a competitive rate to the truck. That doesn't mean you have to always pay them $3 a mile, because again, remember, even today, if you go Boston and Chicago, it's probably $1 a mile, right? And trucks will line up to get your loads out of Boston for $1 a mile to Chicago, because they know out of Chicago, they're going to get $2 or $3 a mile. Okay. So I hope that helps. I know I kind of went down the rabbit hole a little bit there. I didn't want to go too deep, but I hope that really helps. If it did, let me know in the comments. Okay. Good question, Henry. What kind of trouble did you get in this weekend? No trouble this weekend. I was very chill. We had the family over. We had dinner. Found out that my nephew and his fiance are expecting a baby, so that was exciting. So yeah, we had a good time. The weather was nice. Scott, I'm having trouble trying to find my niche. I have some experience in reefer, but I'm in the middle of oil country. Think landman, and I'm not sure how to break into that market. Any suggestions? Okay. So when it comes to finding your niche, what you identified is that you have some experience in refrigerated freight. So the first place I always go is where you have your experience. Okay. So that's the one that's probably the highest probability of you being able to have a real conversation with a prospect very quickly, because you've got that experience, and the stories that you tell about your experience are going to translate very well when you're talking to a prospect. Okay. Because you understand that niche better than any other freight niche that you understand, right? That's just the way it is, because you have that experience. So, but that doesn't mean you have to go in that direction. I understand that you're concerned with the geography. You're in landman geography and, not necessarily where they're moving a lot of refrigerated freight. So I get that, but understand something, that your geography doesn't limit you as a broker or an agent. Let me explain to you what I mean. So I'm in the Buffalo, New York area, and we grew the business. Before I sold the company, we grew the business to about $80 million in sales. And I would tell you that out of that $80 million in sales, probably, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3%, maybe a couple percent of that total came out of my Western New York, Buffalo region. Okay. So you don't want to limit yourself to that local geography when you're making the decision on what niche you're going to pursue. Now, I understand that, you have the oil and gas industry at your disposal, so it may make sense to do that. My suggestion to you is, if you decide not to do the refrigerated niche and you want to do oil and gas, the first thing you have to do is you have to do the research. You have to find out what companies, you'd be prospecting, what type of products you'd be shipping, what type of equipment you would need to, you need to develop relationships with carriers. You'd want to look at the load boards, and you'd want to understand what type of loads are being posted out of your geography. What type of carriers are there? What are the rates? You'd want to do your due diligence. You'd want to gather some sales intelligence. Okay. And then from there, obviously, once you have a good foundation of that, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to make a list of potential customers, right? Potential prospects, whether that be within 100 or 200-mile geography, circumference or radius from wherever you are. Obviously, it's something, if you're looking for a local market, it's probably because you want to go meet them face to face, which I think is a great idea when possible. But I can tell you that 99 out of 100 customers that I did business with as a broker, I never met face to face before I did business with them. So, I stress that because I want you to understand it's not a must. It's a nice to have. So when your freight niche lines up with your local geography, it can be very powerful as long as you're comfortable going out and kind of knocking on doors and walking up on docks, and you're comfortable with having those types of conversations, because you're never going to be able to replace that face-to-face transaction, right? It's much easier to build rapport face-to-face than it is over the phone. Okay. So I hope that helps give you a little bit of a framework, a little bit of a next step. And if you have any follow-up questions, let me know. Thanks, Scott. Nina, do you think it's possible to start a freight brokerage and still work part-time? I think it's possible, but I think it can be very challenging. I'm going to be very upfront with you. The big variable that you'll have to juggle will be when your full-time job is. If you're working from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday in a full-time job, you are not going to be able to build a freight brokerage. It's going to be, let me put it this way. It's going to be very, very, very challenging for you to build a freight brokerage. And the reason why I say that is because you're going to need to be able to make and take phone calls and be on the internet and do things during the day, during normal business hours. Let's call it like 8 to 5, which is when the majority of the freight picks up and delivers and moves, and when you're going to be communicating with your shippers and your carriers. That's where the majority of the work is done. I'm not saying that things don't pick up and deliver at night. They do, but most of those arrangements and conversations happen during normal business hours. So if you can't spend at least 3 or 4 or 5 hours during normal business hours, right? 8 to 5, right? If you can't spend 3 or 4 or 5 hours a day doing that, then I think it's going to be pretty challenging for you. I just had an interview recently with one of my past students who started part-time and eventually went on to build a 7-figure freight brokerage, but he started part-time. But it's not the easiest. It takes a little bit longer, and it's not without its challenges. But I'm not going to tell you that you can't do it. I'm just simply telling you that, it depends upon how your work schedule is. Now, sometimes people will work like second or third shift, right, in their primary job, and then they'll work in the morning and early afternoon to do their freight brokerage or their freight agency, and that can work. Okay, but again, because you have less time, it can take longer. But anything worthwhile is worth investing the time into. So if you're really serious about it, and you have the time during normal business hours, Monday through Friday, then I would say go for it. Good question, Nina. Scott asks, also, how do I create a quick quote for a shipper? Well, I guess it depends on what you mean by quick. Quick is subjective. Ideally, you turn a quote around very quickly, but it's more important for your quote to be accurate, okay? So it's accuracy over speed. Okay. So if you deliver a quote in 5 minutes, but that quote, you underquote it or you significantly overquote it and you don't understand the market, well, then you shouldn't have even quoted it at all. Okay. So the easiest way to quote freight, the most reliable way to quote spot market freight, which is where most freight brokers are. You're not doing contract rates or RFPs. It's usually spot market. The way to do a quick quote is you're simply going to go to the load boards. You're going to post the load, right? At that point, or the load details. You're going to start getting some inbound calls. You're going to start getting some matches of trucks that are that are looking to go that lane or within a certain distance from the origin. And then you're going to start calling some of those trucks. And then you're also going to be able to look at lane makers, which is kind of like it's like a history of what trucks have been posted in those lanes over a 30, 60, 90-day period of time, right? So let's say it's that Atlanta to Buffalo flatbed. I'd be able to see how many times XYZ Trucking posted their truck, their phone number, and then I could contact them. Even if they didn't have a live load, I know that if they post that truck 5 or 10 times a month, I know that they're in the Buffalo area regularly, okay? So you're going to be able to source trucks. The most important thing then you got to start having conversations with those carriers. And so the key here is you have to do what I call find the market. You have to find the spot market. You need to find what it's going to cost you to cover the load from A to B. Now, the worst thing you can do is just ask the carrier, well, what do you want to go from Buffalo to Atlanta or from Atlanta to Buffalo? They're always going to say $2 or $3 a mile, no matter what the lane is, okay? It doesn't matter what they want. It matters what is the spot market. So you can use rating tools like the DAT or the truck stop rating tools to give you a little bit of a high and low and a little bit of a range on what the rates are. And then you're going to start out low, right? You're going to start out on the lower end, and then you're going to negotiate up from there. And you're going to try to get 3 or 4 or 5 trucks that you have identified what the rates are. Let's say, for example, the Atlanta to Buffalo. We've got one for 2,000. We got one for 1,900. We got one for 1,800, and we got one for 2,200. Obviously, we're going to kind of throw out the 2,200 and we're going to throw out the 1,800, and we're going to look at that 1,900 to 2,000 range, because that's going to give you a little bit of an average, and that's going to be what your cost is going to be. You know that reliably and consistently, you should be able to cover that lane for somewhere in that 1,900, maybe 1,950 range. And then from there, you're going to add your margin. So if you think you can cover it reliably for 1,900, maybe you're going to put $150 or $250, depending on, what you want to do onto that lane. And then you're going to quote the shipper, if you put 150 on there, you're going to quote 2,050 all in to the shipper. And then, you're going to pay somewhere around $1,900. You're not going to lose money. You're probably going to make somewhere between $50 and $250 on that load, depending upon what trucks are available at that time. So that's going to give you an idea of how to accurately do a spot market quote. Now, sometimes that might only take 5 minutes if you're good at it. Sometimes that might take you 20 minutes, right? But the reality is I would focus on accuracy over speed. Now, here's the cool part. Once you start quoting that lane from Atlanta to Buffalo, you're going to have all that experience. You're going to know what those trucks were running for. You're going to have an idea. So it's going to cut down on your learning curve. And then once you win some of those loads and you start running that lane, you're going to know exactly who to call. You're going to know exactly what the rates are. You're going to know what to charge. So you really got to do this due diligence up front on those lanes the first time. And then after that, the more you quote those lanes, the more you run those lanes, the less time it's going to take you. Does that make sense? I hope that helps, Scott. Excuse me. Question from William. We have had success working with shippers of bulk products, but reaching companies with dry van freight is difficult. Most dry van shippers want asset-based. Well, I hate to argue with you, William, but the reality is that most dry van freight, right? Most shippers in the dry van freight use brokers. Almost all of them use brokers. Here's the thing. They may not be looking for new brokers, because here's the reality. Dry van is the easiest freight to move. Okay? Meaning it has the least level of complexity as compared to other types of other niches like flatbed or, bulk product or refrigerated or stuff that's specialized, right? So there's a lot more dry van brokers that focus on dry van, and there's a lot more dry van carriers. So there's less demand, right? And there's less need from shippers, but it doesn't mean they don't use brokers. Trust me, they almost all use brokers, right? We did business with some of the largest companies in the world using dry vans. So I just kind of want to share that with you. But yeah, if your niche is bulk, then focus on bulk. I think if you got a good niche there on bulk, then I would focus in on that. William asks, we have an employee that owns his own trucking company. What is the best way to explain that we have assets, but we'll utilize the brokerage 95% of the time? Well, William, if you have an employee that works for you that has trucks, you're not asset-based. Okay? You just have a carrier, if I'm understanding you correctly, the way you wrote it. You're a broker that has access to a carrier that has trucks, just like every other broker. Now, I don't know if I'm misunderstanding this, but the way you wrote it, we have an employee that owns his own trucking company. That means he owns a trucking company. You don't own a trucking company. So you're not asset-based. You're a broker just like anybody else. Now, if you own trucks and you have your own carrier authority and you also have your own brokerage authority, now you're an asset-based broker. But if you've only got 3 trucks and you're going to broker out 95% of the freight, the reality is that you should just be trying to sell brokerage. Because as soon as they ask you how many trucks you have, number one, don't lie. And they're going to find out you have 3 trucks and they're going to realize, well, if he's only got 3 trucks, how's he going to help me? He's just going to broker out all my loads. So my suggestion to you is just focus on selling the brokerage and not trying to sell the assets. Now, if you have 100 trucks and you've got a lot of capacity with your own trucks, that's a different animal, right? You can sell both then. So I hope that helps. Kenrick, where are the hot spots to look for the best shippers, and does tariffs have an effect on shippers setting up new brokers? How can I be more effective when shippers are giving me the same objection? Okay, so hot spots for shippers are places that have more manufacturing, right? More distribution, more population. So it depends upon your niche. For example, if you're in the produce niche, then obviously you're going to be, your season in the northern part of the United States is going to be limited, right? Because it's a short season. So maybe you got apples and a few things like that. The further south you go, the longer the season is going to be and the more produce providers there are going to be. That's a perfect example, right? So as far as hotspots, it depends upon your niche. So I can't give you hotspots, but I would tell you to look at population dense areas, look at states that are more friendly to manufacturing. Perfect example. I live in New York State. New York State is not friendly at all to manufacturing. Now there are manufacturers here, but you don't see a lot of companies investing in setting up new plants and manufacturing and distribution in New York. Why? Because it's not very tax friendly and there's a lot of regulations. So it's hard to do business here. Now, you take a state like Florida, you take a state like Texas, you take some of the other states, they're a lot more friendly to business. So that's why businesses go there. Perfect example. The reason why Tesla moved from California to Texas was because California was not a business-friendly state. Everybody knows this, okay? High taxes, lots of regulations, as opposed to a state like Texas. Now, you may not like Tesla, you may not like California, you may not like Texas, whatever. But my point is those are what some of the dynamics you're going to look for, right? Tariffs will have an effect on all industries to a certain extent. But the reality is that once those prices are absorbed and the market adjusts on those prices, it's not inflation. It's a price increase based upon the tariff. So inflation is something that you have year after year after year. If we've got 3% inflation, then it's 3% this year and 3% next year and 3% the year after that. When you have a tariff price increase, it's a one-time price increase, okay? So could it affect business? Sure, depending upon the types of products, whether they be domestic products, whether they be import or export, whatever the case may be. So if you're buying from a domestic manufacturer that is sourcing most of their stuff, oops, give me 1 second. My computer unplugged and I don't want the battery to die. If you're sourcing from a manufacturer in the US, then obviously you're going to have less tariffs. But if you're sourcing from a manufacturer or distributor in China or in another country, then those tariffs might go up. So tariffs will have an effect on business. But I think what happens is once the economy absorbs that initial shock of those pricing increases, what's going to happen is, I believe, and the theory is that a lot more manufacturing, a lot more jobs, a lot more investments going to come back here to the United States from abroad. For example, if you've got a car manufacturer in Japan, they'll set up manufacturing and distribution facilities here in the US as a way to kind of offset some of those tariffs, which is a great investment for us. And it's great for, obviously, for our logistics and trucking industry. So I'm not an economist, okay? But I'm just giving you a little bit of a back of the napkin type of a thought process here on how it can or may not impact the business, your business. I'm scrolling. Give me 1 minute. Okay, question from Shannon. I have a hard time finding shippers. I've already paid for my load board and bond. I'm thinking signing on with a company as a broker. I just would hate to create a Bob and can't create a Bob and can't. Your thoughts? Can you clarify that, Shannon? I'm a little bit confused. Oh, can't take a book of business. Okay, gotcha. Okay. So if you're going to sign on with a broker as an agent, you definitely do not want to sign any sort of a no-back solicitation or a non-compete. An agent is an independent contractor. Now, if you go sign on as a W-2 broker, right, as an employee working for the brokerage, and you're a W-2 employee, then you have to be very careful because you may fall into the into what I call the TQL trap, right? Which is where you go work for TQL as a broker. They teach you, they train you, you build your book of business, but you can't transition that business because you have to sign a no-back solicitation clause and a non-compete. I think it's a 2-year non-compete. So if you were to leave TQL and you try to go compete with them, they could potentially sue you, okay, if you don't meet the terms of that non-compete. I don't know exactly what it says, but my point is that you want to be careful what companies you go work with for that exact reason. Now, if you become an agent in an independent contractor 1099 working as an agent under a broker, then you also want to make sure you don't sign a non-compete or no back solicitation. But it's a lot more rare for a broker to require a 1099 agent to sign a non-compete than it is a W-2 employee, right? So I hope that helps. Henry, how to overcome an underquote. So if you underquote a lane, typically what happens is the worst thing that can happen, there's a couple things that can happen. The worst thing that can happen is they're going to give you the freight and you can't cover it. Okay. If you can't cover it and make money. Okay. So let's run through scenario A. Scenario A is, I quote Henry a load from point A to point B for $1,000. And then Henry gives me that load. And then I reach out to my carriers and I can't cover that load for $1,000. I can't cover that load for $900. It's going to cost me $1,100 or $1,200 or $1,300. Worst case scenario, you should take a loss on that load and fulfill your obligation to the customer in an effort to try to develop that relationship, build trust, and then you could potentially adjust that rate later on. Okay. That later on could be next week, or it could be several months down the road, depending upon, the type of rapport and relationship you have with them. So my suggestion to you is if you underquote something and they give you the load and you're dedicated on that lane, it's not going out to 10 different brokers. You're dedicated on that load. You do whatever you have to cover that load, even if it costs you $100 or $200, $300, even if you've got to lose a little bit of money on that load. That's scenario A. Scenario B is you underquote the lane to a shipper, and the shipper says, a red flag goes up, and the hair on the back of their neck goes up because they're currently running the load for $1,500, and you come in at $1,000, and you come in much, much lower than their current rates. They've got a bunch of different brokers and carriers that are running at around $1,500 or $1,600, and you come in and quote them at $1,000. That creates, while they would love to move that load for $1,000, the problem is they don't trust it because it seems too good to be true. Everybody's heard that old adage: when it seems to be too good to be true, right? It usually is, right? So that can create a red flag. Now, the situation there is, how do you recover from that, right? How do you recover from that? You recover from that by owning your mistake. There's no sense in trying to put lipstick on a pig, okay? The reality is, own the mistake. Simply take ownership of it, adjust the rate, and then let them know that, you'll make sure it doesn't happen again. I made a mistake. That's the reality. You don't want to build the foundation of your new relationship with the customer on a lie. That's the reason why it's important that you quote appropriately, that you do your due diligence, and you actually, you're not just going to some rating tool and looking at what they would charge and then marking it up $100 or $200. That's not how to develop spot rates. That's not how you understand the market. That's not the best way, the most accurate way to do quotes. You need to be able to have those conversations with carriers so you understand what the spot market is in and out of any of those lanes that you're running at any given point. Okay? So hope that helps, Henry. Okay, a couple more questions. Okay, good question from Michael. Is it better to offer a quote as a flat rate all in, or a rate with fuel broken down so they know where their costs are coming from? It depends upon the client. You should quote the loads and the lanes based upon how the customer wants you to quote it. Most customers in brokerage are going to be looking for one of two types of rates. All in, which means, hey, if I pick up this load tomorrow, right, based upon picking that load up tomorrow, you're going to pay me $1,000 all in. That means the line haul, the fuel, everything. That's your total rate to me as the shipper. It's now my responsibility to negotiate with the carrier and pay them $800 to $900. Okay. So that's and when you do, and then you sell the load the same way to the carrier. You just give them an all-in rate. You tell them it's a one drop van load. It's 750 miles, and here's the rate. Okay. So you give them an all-in rate. So if you're buying it, you almost always negotiate all-in rates with carriers, unless there's some sort of a specialized load, or maybe it's 100 weight or something like that. There's some specialized pricing. But if the customer asks for all-in rates, then you give them all-in rates. If the customer asks for line haul plus fuel, then you give them line haul plus fuel. You may not quote the same with every customer. Different customers like their rates different ways. The nice thing about doing line haul plus fuel, even though it's a little bit more work, is that the rates will flex based upon your fuel surcharge. So if the price of fuel goes up, then your rates will automatically adjust, because you'll have a fuel matrix, right, that will say if fuel is X dollars per gallon, then the fuel surcharge is Y. But if you do spot market and you've been running this load for $1,000, and then all of a sudden fuel shoots up $1 a gallon, your price is going to shoot up. So you're going to have to requote that lane, because your price has to flex with the market. Because if fuel goes up $1, then it's going to cost you more, because it's going to cost the carriers more. So I hope that makes sense. What is the best TMS today? I'm using Airtable. It's impossible for me to answer the best TMS. For freight broker startups, I like Ascend TMS. And the reason why I like Ascend is because I know the owner personally. You can go to freightbrokerbootcamp.com/TMS. I know Tim Hyam personally. I've known him for years. He has one of the most innovative, one of the most forward, thinking, and one of the most technologically advanced freight broker TMSs. Okay. It's very simple. I've used it. I've seen it. I've referred hundreds of clients to it. We've heard a lot of great things. And so all I can tell you is that there is no best, right? That's very subjective. I can tell you that if you go to that, you can sign up for a free trial with no credit card. If you go to that link, freightbrokerbootcamp.com/TMS, you can sign up for a trial with no credit card. All you have to do is put FBBC in the promo code, right? In the coupon code. And then they'll know that I referred you from my community and you won't have to put a credit card in. And I think they give you a bonus of like a shippers list of some sort of like 10 or 20,000 shippers based on, a list that they've assembled of just shippers that they've, from online. And so, yeah, that would be where I would suggest you go, particularly if you're a startup. Okay. Or you're newer to the business. So you can just go to freightbrokerbootcamp.com/TMS and just put FBBC in the coupon code. And that's what will allow you to make sure you sign up, get the bonus, and you won't have to use a credit card. Okay. Okay, follow-up question from Nina. Dennis, my last question is, and where I seem to be not sure about in getting my brokerage full-time once I figure out my niche. I'm struggling with that as of now. My last question is where I seem to be not sure about in getting my brokerage full-time once I figure out my niche. Okay, so is your question what niche you should pursue? The way your question is written, it's very confusing to me. I mean, what are you looking for? Be specific on what you're looking for. I'm a little bit confused. Are you just looking for what niche you should pursue? Because if you are, you're on my YouTube, you're following me on YouTube right now. Go to my YouTube channel and then under my videos, search for Freight Broker Niche. And I have 2 videos there. One video is how to find your niche. And the second video is avoid these mistakes and mistakes to avoid when developing your freight broker niche. That would be what I would suggest. Okay. I'm not going to go through and do that entire training right now because it would be too lengthy. Plus, if you go to my YouTube channel and you do that search for freight broker niche under my videos, you're going to find an entire training, an entire framework that I lay out, as well as a separate video that will, identify some of the core key mistakes that I see people making, new freight brokers and freight agents making. So, hey, listen, hope this helped you guys. Appreciate it. You guys had a lot of great questions. I'm going to wrap it up for today. But listen, if you guys are curious about becoming a freight broker, maybe this is, maybe you're looking for some hand-holding. Maybe you're looking for a guide. Maybe you're looking for, some online course that could teach you from A to Z. Just check out freightbrokerbootcamp.com, right? Trained over 10,000 students, had that program for 15 plus years now. And we offer a 60-day, 100% unconditional money back guarantee. That is my freight broker startup program. So if you're brand new to brokering, brand new to becoming an agent, and you're looking for some help, that's where you go to Freight Broker Bootcamp. Now, if you're already a broker or you're already an agent and you're struggling with sales, you're struggling with getting shippers, you're struggling with that sales process, you're struggling with how to do cold calling and cold emailing and using LinkedIn and finding shippers and actually doing the sales component, right? If you're focused in on that, then I have a program called my Freight Broker Sales Accelerator Program. It's an 8-week live coaching program where I take that piece of my brain, I transplant it into your head, and I teach you my best freight broker sales strategies, tactics, tools, but most importantly, my entire system that allowed me to do over $200 million as a freight broker. Now, that program is closed out right now. You can't join, but you can get on the wait list. If you go to freightbrokerbootcamp.com/waitlist, you'll be the first to get notified when new spots open up. Now, it is not a free program. It is not a cheap program. And again, it's totally separate from Bootcamp. Bootcamp is the startup program. Sales Accelerator is a coaching program. So they're 2 totally different programs, okay? So, but if you need help on the sales side and getting shippers, we can help you get your first 5 or 10 shippers and on your way to 7 figures. Hope that helps. Make sure you sign up for the wait list. Appreciate you guys being here. Have an awesome day. Thank you for your patience. I'm sorry I haven't been here for the last few weeks. I'll see you next Monday on the next Freight Broker Bootcamp Live. Thanks all.